Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Charlotte Potter-Klesick. I'm the interim director here at the Barre Art Museum. The Barre Art Museum opened its doors in the fall of 2018. It houses the personal collection of Dick and Carolyn Barre. We have biennial rotating exhibitions and new acquisitions. The museum serves as one of the many cultural icons of Norfolk, Virginia, and sits at the gateway of Old Dominion University. I'm going to share a little bit of our collection with you briefly. We have three primary collecting areas. First, we have American modernist paintings, as well as marine art. Second, we have contemporary glass sculpture that chronicles the studio glass movement up to present day. And finally, we have our historic dolls and automata that act as the precursor to modern day robots. We have a number of changing exhibitions. Today's lecture is in support of the LaMonte Théâtre de la Mode exhibition. This opens to the public next week, September 9th. It runs through January 2nd. I want to take a moment to thank our incredible, generous sponsors for allowing us to produce this beautiful exhibition. The Barre Art Museum Board of Directors, in honor of our museum's founders, Dick and Carolyn Barre, for their remarkable vision and stewardship. Town Bank, Sarah Baker, the Rudder Family Art Foundation, and Linda Kaufman. Coming up this fall, we have Luke Jerram's Museum of the Moon. It's a 3-day pop-up festival. We're closing down 43rd Street right in front of the museum, and we have incredible partner programs from wonderful institutions such as NASA, the Core Theater Ensemble, the Nansen Shruffolk Native American Tribe, to name a few. It's going to be an incredible 3-day celebration. We hope that you can join us. It's free and open to the public. This incredible exhibition is also made possible by our incredible sponsors. The Bleakhorn Foundation, ODU in honor of Carolyn and Dick, Joan Brock, WHRO Public Media, James Hickson, the ODU Alumni Association, the Rudder Family Art Foundation, and Carolyn Barre's yoga class. Waxing and Waning is the companion exhibition to the Museum of the Moon. Inside the museum, patrons will be able to do free activities with NASA, as well as virtual reality on the moon, hands-on projects, and check out our own Waxing and Waning exhibit. This is a jewel box companion exhibit, and it has pieces featured by artists local to ODU, Peter Utenbach and Greta Pratt, as well as remarkable pieces from the Chrysler Museum of Art's permanent collection, like this James Turrell you see here. We offer a number of free programs to the public. We have tours, audio tours, free Saturday in-person tours, and multimedia tours you can have from your own home. We have free art-inspired yoga every other week. It's a video that you can watch at your own convenience and explore our collection through movement. We have at-home activities you can do with your wee ones or even just yourself. We even have like a cookbook as of late, as well as our free monthly lecture series, which is what has brought us here today. This hour is a lecture by Stephen L. Grafe, who's the curator of art at the Maryhill Museum of Art in Goldendale, Washington. He's going to discuss the Théâtre de la Mode Mannequins and the sets that inspired the Karen LaMonte Etude series of her scaled dresses. Stephen L. Grafe completed an MA and PhD degrees in art history at the University of New Mexico. He published works including The Peoples of the Plateau, the Indian photographs of Lee Morehouse, as well as Blackfeet photographs by Waitzer McClinton and Plactoral picture beadwork. The Fred L. Mitchell Collection. He served as the curator of American Indian art at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, the chief curator at the Southwest Museum in Los Angeles, and worked for the National Park Service. Steve has been the curator of art at the Maryhill Museum of Art since 2009, where he's responsible for the Théâtre de la Mode mannequins, numerous Romanian folk textiles, and a noted collection of works by Augustine Rodin, and expansive holdings of Indigenous American art, and a growing collection of Orthodox Christian icons. I ask you to join me in welcoming Stephen Grafe.
Hi, thank you, Charlotte. Okay, let's look at some pictures. Okay, I hope that looks right. And if it doesn't, let me know now. So the Théâtre de la Mode collection of mannequins has been at Maryhill Museum since 1952. They were originally 1945 and 1946 mannequins that were created by the couture houses in Paris as a way to raise funds for French war relief following the Second World War. And I'm going to really gloss over the German occupation of Paris because there's nothing happy about it, and we have so much other material to cover that I'll just keep it really short. The Germans invaded Paris on the 14th of June in 1940. Charles de Gaulle left for London 3 days later, flew out of northern France, and an armistice was signed on the 22nd of June. Adolf Hitler visited the city the following day, and for the next 4 years, the Germans were in control. During the occupation, the Paris fashion houses were forbidden from exporting, advertising, and even from making a profit. And the Germans, when they arrived in the city, had a plan to transport the entire couture industry and their accompanying professional schools to Berlin and Vienna. The idea was that Berlin would become the cultural center of the new Europe, and the unjust monopoly of Paris would be broken. 6 weeks after the occupation began, the Germans seized the Chambre Syndicale's archives. This is the organization of fashion houses, and the archives included documents on design, on export, trade schools, and files on all of their foreign buyers. Lucien LaLonde, who is shown here, was president of the organization at that time. And about 6 weeks after the archives had been taken, he went to Berlin and negotiated their return to Paris. Over the course of the next 4 years, there were 14 different occasions when the couture industry was put in danger in ways similar to this. LaLonde claimed that at the end of the war, 97% of couture was still intact in Paris. So in Paris, the artisans who were involved with bespoke clothing worked in tiny ateliers, and many of them specialized in single, small details that really weren't that teachable except through long apprenticeships and practice. In the 1940s, the Paris fashion industry employed more than 30,000 couture workers, and the satellite industries employed almost 1 million others. So couture was extremely important, not only to the aesthetic sense of Paris and the well-being of the city's residents, but also to the economy of the city. So we're jumping ahead 4 years to August of 1944. The liberation of the city had begun a couple days before. Allied troops, French and American troops, moved to the edges and then into the city. And on the 26th of August, Charles de Gaulle paraded down the Champs-Élysées through the city of Paris with about 1 million people watching and cheering. So I'm afraid I'm just going to have to bombard you with words here, but it's only 3 slides. We're just going to talk briefly about how the Théâtre de la Mode came to be. Shortly after the liberation, an individual who was an administrator with one of the French aid agencies spoke to Robert Rishi, the son of Nina Rishi, Robert Rishi, about a project of some kind to benefit war relief. Rishi took the idea to a meeting of the executive committee of the Chambre Syndicale, of which LaLonde was president, and in October 1944, so the liberation was at the end of August, so September has happened, and we're about 6 weeks later in October 1944, the Chambre Syndicale approved it. Rishi and a fashion journalist named Paul Caldegs were tasked with organizing the venture, and actually not just organizing it, but conceiving it a little more clearly. And they decided that an important aspect of whatever they were going to do would utilize some of the more in vogue artists who were working at the city at that moment. And it actually worked out that it wasn't, they didn't really employ so many artists as they did stage and set designers. The initial idea was they would stage a gala for which dolls wearing couture dresses would be created, copied, and sold. And you think about this for a minute, and of course that would have been an extremely labor-intensive thing. The reason that the question of dolls came up in the first place was because of the Parisian tradition of creating fashion dolls to model clothing in a given year for clients who were at a great distance. So let's say a century before this, if you were a client in Hungary or in Istanbul or somewhere else, you could be sent a doll showing what an example of that year's fashion or multiples. So it was ultimately decided, the idea of the doll was kept, but it was ultimately decided they needed a new kind of doll. So Elian Bonbel, who was the person who ultimately created the prototype for the mannequin, thought that it should be something that wasn't too solid, something that didn't feel like a toy, something that was light and airy. And then a Catalan artist who was living in the city, Juan Rebel, was brought on board to create individual unique plaster heads for each mannequin. And he was concerned that they not have makeup. He wanted them to be small sculptures. And then Rishi, after a period of time ruminating, came up with the idea of placing the individual dolls in stage sets. And then with that, came up with the idea of calling everything the Théâtre de la Mode, the theater of fashion. So as the project developed, the stage designers, the artists, and the couturiers were given complete freedom to create both the sets and the clothing of their choosing. The number of textiles they created generally had to do with the size and their ability to make those. And then this kind of happy rivalry developed where everything became accessorized, and even in some instances, underwear was created for the models. These are 27-inch tall mannequins, okay? And they were competing with each other to try and do better. And the thing that's really important to remember about this whole process, Paris was liberated in end of August 1944. The war didn't end until April of the following year. So a great deal of material was not available because it was being used in the war effort. Infrastructure wasn't available to ship things to Paris. There were pretty much all-time lows of availability for any number of materials. There were still food shortages. There were still shortages for heating oil. So the entire enterprise took place within the context of pretty severe privation and shortages. So it was kind of a double triumph. It was a triumph over the physical issues, but it was also a triumph of creativity. So here we have a photo, Robert Rishi on the left, Lucien Lalonde on the right, with a Théâtre de la Mode mannequin. And these two men, along with Paul Caldegues, were the ones who really brought this project to fruition. The show, well, there was an opening on the night of the 27th, but the show opened to the public on the 28th of March in 1945 in the Pavillon des Marsands of the Louvre. And the exhibition was supposed to remain on view for just 1 month, but it was held over for almost 2 because of public demand. These are pages from the 1945 catalog that show you variously, reading from left to right and up to down, the individuals who designed the decors, the individuals who are responsible for creating the mannequins, 40 fashion houses, and then various hairstylists and hat makers and shoemakers and other people who made other accessories. And this introduction from that catalog is the source of my title, because one of the things that everyone who was involved wanted the public to understand, both French and European and ultimately American, is that they weren't creating a commercial effort. They weren't trying to be obscenely luxurious or lavish. They wanted, it was, as he says here, it's instead a proof of ingenuity and good taste. And then at the end of the second sentence, he says, our desire is to present it as a purely artistic manifestation. So the creative aspect was the most important thing. And the other thing, of course, they wanted the world to know was that Paris fashion was still alive after the war. Those of you who are familiar with the Louvre, you can see the pyramid here and can get oriented. And beneath the big red arrow is where the Théâtre de la Mode opened in 1945. And in fact, that is also where it opened after it had been restored in 1988 to 1990. It opened in the same location. And there's a couple of numbers. The show was still on view, still being held over on the day that the war ended. And more than 100,000 people visited the exhibition in the 2 months that it was up in Paris. More than £1 million were raised by admission there. But by the following year, the fashion industry had contributed more than 55 million francs to the relief effort in France. So we'll look really briefly at the mannequins. This is sort of the raw mannequin design on your left, as it was conceived by Éliane Bonneville, who at the time was only 24 when she came up with this design. And I've chosen to give you this photo of her on the right that was taken later in 1945 in London, because she's the person who, when the show traveled to different locations, she's the person who accompanied it to make sure that they were cared for and properly displayed. On the left is Jean Saint-Martin, who was a sculptor and who had a long experience creating mannequins. And he constructed all of the wire mannequins in his apartment building, in his apartment actually. And every single one of them is different, posed differently. And then on the right is Juan Rebel in his studio, and you can see he's working with plaster. He's actually working on mythical figures that were part of a set that he created for the mannequins, but you can see him at work. So these are the three personalities that were involved in the creation of the mannequins. And then we'll look at the decors, and I apologize. Actually, I'm going to apologize for two things. One is I'm going to apologize for my French pronunciation because it's been years since I was in a university French class. And the other thing is I get a little obsessive about the decors just because there are about 20 of them, but apart from we have an online exhibition about them on the museum's website. There were about 20 of them, but we show 7 there in that online exhibition that haven't really been talked about up until just the last few months. So as you would imagine, many people in Paris who were involved in stagecraft were employed to work on these sets. And as I said, most of the people who designed the Théâtre de la Mode sets were professional set designers. Here are people working on 2 different decors. The first few sets I'm going to show you are from 1945, and they're imaginary locations. Let me say they're imaginary locations. This is a set, in fact, that's on display at the museum right now. And the interesting challenge about the displaying the Théâtre de la Mode is that the 1945 fashions toured Europe. I've read that the ones that ended up in Copenhagen were sold auctioned off at that time for war relief. But the 1945 fashions are essentially lost. We don't know what happened to them. The 1946 fashions that came to North America are here. The extant ones are here. But in 1988 to 1990, when the sets were recreated, it was primarily 1945 sets that were remade and that we have. So what you're looking at here is a 1945 set, but it has 1946 fashions in it, and that is generally the case. Here's another set, the Enchanted Grotto, that is on display also at the museum right now. The recreation of a 1945 set, but with 1946 fashions. The interesting thing you'll see later, the same designer, Andre Barre, created a similar set in 1946, but not exactly the same set. This is a set that, this photograph is scanned from the 1945 catalog. It's really about the only image I've ever seen of it, but again, it's a sort of a fantastic representation of a location. Apparently these women have just come off this boat in a harbor somewhere, and that was the artist's context for creating a scene for them. This one is also reproduced. The photo is reproduced from the 1945 catalog. It's the but the difference here, and for the next few that follow, is we're looking at sets of specific locations in Paris. So the set designers are really celebrating Paris in these next few sets. So this is the morning on the Champs-Élysées, and the quote from the catalog, and I spared you these lengthy quotes from the catalog because it's hard to really look as much as you want and have to read, but he's basically saying, if you don't know, the essay said, if you don't know the charm of a fine morning in spring on the Champs-Élysées, you don't know one of the most characteristic charms of Paris. Here are two more very Paris-specific decors. The Paris sketch decor was created by Jean Saint-Martin, who made the mannequins, and you'll sort of recognize his signature twisted wire. We'll see his New York scene. It's using the same technique, but it's of a different location. And then at the bottom here, we've got models basically parading across what appears to be a Paris over the River Seine with Notre Dame Cathedral in the background. This same set also appeared in Paris, in New York, but it was modified significantly. And where you see these sections of drapery at left and right, it has a small array of shops. So it's slightly different. Has the same name. These both have the same name in New York, but they're both modified somewhat. A fourth location, very Paris specific, of a decor that was only shown in 1945. And again, as you can read in the quote, it's a location that's important to Paris fashion and its sense of its identity. And the same can be said of this one. There's no spot in the world where this location does not conjure up smart and luxurious elegance. So you begin to get the sense that the set designers are trying to bring people, visitors, bring them back to Paris, at least in their mind's eye, and appreciate a certain chicness and good taste and refinement. I think reminding them that it's been that way for generations and suggesting that it's going to continue to be that way in the future. And then finally, there are a couple I'm not showing you just yet, but this is the last one from the 1945 installation that I am going to show you. It only appeared in 1945, and it's of Georges Giffray was a very well-known designer. There's actually a book about him well, there's a couple books about him, but he was really a celebrated mid-century interior designer in Paris. And one of the things I'm really interested that the essayist has to say about this room is his last sentence where he says, this drawing room, he celebrates the drawing room and he says, this drawing room is like the inside of a golden casket, which I find a little bit of an interesting analogy. And in fact, it's not the only time in the catalog, the vintage catalogs, where he talks about something being like the inside of a golden casket. And I just personally feel like maybe that's not a description we would use right now, today. So the 1945 exhibition it premiered in Paris, and in its entirety, it went to London. Parts of it appeared in Barcelona, Leeds. Well, actually, maybe most of it. It's hard to figure this out, but it went to Leeds because Leeds was the center of the British textile industry. And then part of it went to Copenhagen, Stockholm, Vienna. And then in 1946, a spring summer set of attire went to New York and San Francisco. And it was very well received in Paris, in London. I think another 100,000 people visited it in London. And here Her Majesty the Queen there at the far right is visiting the show. So now we come to the decors in 1946. And as I said, new fashions were created for 1946. The show played, again, as a benefit for French war aid at the Whitlaw Reid House, which was at 451 Madison Avenue, this was built for Henry Villard. It was a Gilded Age mansion that was built for Henry Villard, who lived in it for a matter of weeks before he went bankrupt some years before. But this is the location of the show in New York. And an interesting thing, I've given you the page from detail of a page from the program. So it says right up the top, the interior decoration for the exhibition is by Georges Geffray. He designed a really opulent hallway that led into the exhibition in lieu of creating a decor for North America. And then the interesting thing that you can see from the program is the sets are here lumped together by subject, unlike in Paris where they were just shown as autonomous groupings. So we have two sets that are under the heading of the street fair. We have 3 sets under the heading of Paris, and we have 3 more sets under the heading night scenes. And then we have a Jean Cocteau set, a Christian Barre set, and a Juan Rebo set. So here's one of the 2 street scenes. And what these sort of celebrate are the street fairs that used to occur in residential districts in Paris. And these 2 sets were adjacent to each other at the beginning of the exhibition. And what I've chosen to do at this point is, rather than just drone on about decors, to show you garments that were part of those decors as well. So these are 4 decors from Louis Toucheg's street fair decor. And one of the things that's really going to be obvious to you is that in a given set, the ensembles relate to the time of day and the need. So you're not going to see evening dresses in the street fair. You're going to see women dressed as if they were at the street fair. So here are the first 4 fashions. And I should say, if you go to, there is a book about the Théâtre de la Mode that has thumbnails of every existing outfit in it. And then we have 2 online exhibitions that show different photos of the same and those outfits in situ. So here's the other street fair decor. And I apologize for these photos. I've only ever found them in 1946 postcards And in fact, I haven't even found them in 1946 postcards. I've found them online in 1946 postcards, and I haven't been able to get originals, or I'd have much better images for you. And if anybody ever runs across these in a yard sale, will you please let us know so we can at least scan them? So here are 4, okay, here's the set again, and then here are 4 ensembles from that set that survive. And you know, Schiaparelli, Balenciaga, there's some extremely high profile designers in all of these sets. So this is the Carousel by Juan Rabel. And the interesting thing about the differences between the European version and the North American version is that here we mostly have cherubic children or young mermaids and young centaurs, where in the European version they were all fully developed adult figures. But here's the Carousel, and then here are 3 fashions from this Carousel. 2 of them which the people at the Barre will recognize, because the 2 on the middle and the right are 2 that Maryhill has loaned to the exhibition and that you all will be able to see in a week or so. What I want to call you attention to is the Beachwear Ensemble on the left by Jacques Heim, partly because it's a far cry away from the more formal attire. But Jacques Heim was a Jewish designer who managed to survive the occupation in Paris, and happily several of his designs are in Théâtre de LaMonte. I think we'll see one later. So earlier I showed you the Jean Saint-Martin, the twisted wire cityscape of Paris. Well, here's as it appeared in Paris. This is his Parisian view. This is the first of the 3 Paris scenes that appeared in North America, and you can see again the twisted wire. You recognize it, but it's a completely different scene than appeared before. And here are some of the ensembles from it. Again, Jacques Heim on the right, far right. This is the one scene that is from the 1946 tour that was recreated when everything went to Paris to be restored. And again, it's a specific location in Paris that's associated with fashion. And fashions, 27-inch tall fashions from the same, 27-inch tall mannequins from that set. George Wakovich in 1945, his was the women at the kind of odd harbor scene with the strange ship in the distance. And this is what, and of course the difference here too is that in 1946 in New York, this was a 3-dimensional set, and when it was recreated, it was just a flat panel. See, I told you I would drone on about the decors. My apologies. Here are 4 more outfits from that same set. So we've gone through the 3 Paris scenes. Now we're going to look at 3 that are called night scenes. And the interesting thing about all 3 of these is that this clothing is almost exclusively long evening gowns. So here's the scene, and it's simply called, there's no actual formal title for it in the catalog, in the 1946 catalog. It's simply referred to in passing as A Temple of Love. And here are 3 of the ensembles from it. This one is, again, just in passing, it's unnamed, it's simply called Scenery for a Comedy Ballet. And then in the 1946 catalog, I didn't feel like I had room to include the image, but there's a color render, like an artist sketch of this, a preliminary sketch, and it's just full of color. So it's unfortunately, it only shows up in photos in black and white, but it's, as I said, most of these artists designed either for opera or theater or the state or ballet, and so that's what's going on here, is that it's just essentially a scenery for a ballet with a bunch of long dresses. So we looked at Andre Beaurepair's decor that's at the museum right now. This is his 1946. No name. It's called an Enchanted Palace, but you can see it has a lot of affinities with the previous year's set. And again, long dresses. So one artist we haven't talked about yet is Christian Barre, and he was the artistic director for the entire Théâtre de la Mode. He was something of a savant, shall we say. And on the left side of this image, you see 6 Vogue magazine covers, because he was all the rage in Paris during the 1930s when it came to fashion illustration. And he not only did magazine covers and posters and other publications, he also did a lot of fashion renderings for fashion houses. So he created what I think is arguably one of the 2 most popular sets. It's the theater set, and it's popular for a couple of reasons. One is it's a gigantic set that's beautifully designed, and also it is popular because theater, it was so important to the life, was and is so important to the life of Paris. Of the 9 sets that are at Maryhill Museum, this is the one we can't display because it's too large for our gallery, because by the time you hung that chandelier that's in the middle there, you're up 12, maybe even 14 feet, and that's just a little higher than we can go. Another interesting thing that I'm not showing you, you can see in the box seats in the distance, you see those figures? A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them were made so that they were only constructed to slightly below the waist, because that's all that people would see when they looked at the set. I didn't include photos of them. They look kind of odd. Because they don't have legs, and they weren't made to have legs. They're just sitting on the ground, rather short. But this set appeared in Paris and Europe in 1945 and in North America in 1946. This set did as well. This is Jean Cocteau's homage to René Clair, the filmmaker. And when I said that the theater was the most popular and then I took it back, it's because this set seems to appeal to a certain sensibility of young people. And it's the only set out of the 20 that really makes reference to a war scene, because it appears that the room is bombed out, it's lost walls, it's lost ceilings, and everybody else designed for spaces that were more idyllic and nostalgic, and this one is pretty immediate, especially in the aftermath of the Second World War in Paris. And here are a couple of the fashions from it. So these are numbers. These are the numbers from the Paris catalog. There were 40 designers, etc. In North America, there were 52, but I'm just using this page to introduce you to some specific designers and to the process. Here are women at work in an unknown to us fashion house, working on outfits for mannequins. And then here we have hair being created, hair design being done, shoes being created. And I hope most of you, all of you, will be able to come here someday and look at these, because it's wonderful, wonderful work done at a very, very small scale. So there's a handout that you'll be able to see shortly. This photographer, Béla Bernon, who's a Hungarian photographer, press photographer working in Paris, and for some happy reason, in the week or so before the Théâtre de la Mode was installed, he visited some of the designers and some of the staging area and took photos of a lot of designers. So they're all in an online exhibition on Tumblr right now. And so what we have in those photos is 1945 fashions. And what I've tried to do for you is match them with 1946 fashions by the same designer. And something really important I want to say about Madame Carvan. During the occupation, she had a Romanian tailor who happened to be Jewish, and pretty much for the duration of the occupation, she managed to keep him and his family successfully hidden. And for that, in 2002, she was honored as Righteous Among the Nations at a ceremony in Jerusalem. And apart from just being important for itself, there were other people, other designers who were pretty well-known Nazi collaborators. And so this is a really important counterpoint to that. And I do want you to notice that I have her living from 1909 and 2015 to 2015, so 105 years. And I double checked that about 2 hours ago, and that is correct. She lived to be 105. Speaking of Nazi collaborators, here's one of them. I'm just quoting what historians have discovered in the aftermath of the war, that 2 or 3 of the designers, some designers worked with the Germans basically in order to stay in business, and some of them were maybe a little more enthusiastic than that. And actually went and sought out German patronage. But Jacques Fat was one of them, who is known for having been an enthusiastic, who enthusiastically sought German support for his projects. And this is his wife, who was formerly a model before she became his wife. And then I'm always excited to find miniature fashions at full size somehow, and so I was really happy to find this a fashion illustration of the design that's on the left. Jean Laban, and one of her fashions, fashion on the left from 1945, fashion on the right from 1946. And then we're going to look at Lucien Lelong a bit, because he's kind of one of the heroes of the story. And I also happen to have a lot more photos of him from 1945. But here he is with the Théâtre de la Mode mannequin in 1945, one of his fashions from 1946. And again. And then yet again, a fashion illustration from 1946 with the Théâtre de la Mode version. And finally, the Théâtre de la Mode version on the far left, and not one but 2 fashion illustrations of that same ensemble. And if there's a young graduate student out there looking for a project, I would say it would be very interesting to search all of the fashion magazines from 1946, looking for as many examples of Théâtre de la Mode fashions as can be found, because I have a hunch there's probably 100 or more. Madeleine de Roche, with what looks to be her entire suite of designs from 1945 on the right. And then a 1946 fashion from one of the street fair decors. And then Robert and Nina Rishi, who started their fashion house in 1932. Robert, at the Nina Rishi house, he took care of the business side and she took care of the design side. And in 1945, when the Théâtre, 44 into 45, when Théâtre de la Mode was conceived and developed, he was the publication and marketing manager for the entire syndicale. So he was an important presence, though mainly on the business side of couture. And Nina Rishi again. And Marcel Roches, again, another individual who collaborated to a certain extent with the Germans, partially based on what I've read, because he was an extremely ambitious individual, and during the early 40s, that seemed to him to be the best way to get ahead. And I'm showing you a lot of him because, again, I have a lot of photos of him. The dress on the right is being loaned to an exhibition in Madrid that will open in 2022. And then here he is. This is an interesting photo on the left where he's holding, in 1945, he's holding a Théâtre de la Mode mannequin, and then the woman is dressed in the full-length attire. And Maggie Ruff, sadly, also one who took advantage of the opportunity to do business with Germans, maybe more than was necessary during 1940 to 1944. And I'll show you just a few more. I'm impressed with the design on the two, particularly the two middle and left. These are all from one of the street fair decors. And then these three, two more from the Temple of Love, and one that we don't really know what it was originally associated with. So the later history of this is really quite interesting. After the show closed at the De Young Museum in San Francisco in 1946, it was taken to, there was an attempt made to return all the fashions to Paris. The fashion houses didn't want to pay the duty. They were old fashions. The only things that returned to Paris were the jewelry, because they were gold and with diamonds and rubies and emeralds and whatnot. So the Théâtre de la Mode mannequins, we don't know what happened to the sets, but the mannequins went into the basement of the City of Paris department store, which is on the northeast corner, was on the northeast corner of Union Square in San Francisco. It later became Neiman Marcus. And the man who was president of the museum, in combination with Alma Spreckels, who had married into the Spreckels sugar family and was a early patron of Maryhill Museum, we consider her one of our four founders. They came up with the idea of bringing the mannequins to Maryhill, and Paul Verdier was ultimately successful in getting the Chambre Syndicale to approve the donation. So in 1952, the mannequins without the sets all came to Maryhill. And they were displayed about 80 at a time like this, without sets, just one up. And I've heard rumors that museum volunteers like to mix and match sets happily those days are behind us. And now we're pretty confident that everything in any given ensemble is where it should be. But this is, so from 1952 to 1988, this is essentially how they were shown at Maryhill. Then in 1988, they went back to Paris, and they were everything, all of the clothing was fully restored, and then new sets were made, new replica sets were made. And the reason I show you the snapshot on the right, the woman on the right with her hands up, that is Eliane Bonneville, who originally created the design for the mannequins. And the woman in the middle is Anne Sergers, who is the person who recreated the stage sets. So after all that work was done, they opened again the show opened again in Paris, and then it traveled more or less around the world. If New York, London, New York, Honolulu, and Tokyo can be considered around the world, then they went around the world. And here is the banner on the front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York from 1990. These are the two sets that are on display at Maryhill right now, two of the three that are on display at Maryhill right now. And this is the third one. And these three will all change out this winter, and they will be replaced by three more. And I'm just going to quickly run through why this all matters. The first and most important reason at the time was so that the French public would know that couture still existed and that it still had vitality. The second reason is that it illustrates the importance of fashion and fine art together in Paris, and there had been almost a third of a century of that collaboration. From a fashion point of view, these are the 2 years between the war and Christian Dior's new look, and it's a bit of a revelation to me, who doesn't have a tremendous background in fashion, to understand what a flashpoint the new look was, and how it really is the point from which other things are measured. And finally, and kind of most remarkably, it's unique to have 172 outfits made by 52 different designers during a single season. There isn't really another example of this anywhere. If you're interested in learning more, this is the book I referenced, the Théâtre de LaMonte book. There are thumbnail photographs of every single extant outfit in it. And then fashion during the occupation, if you want the context that leads up to the Théâtre de LaMonte, it's all there in one place. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That was incredible. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
I don't know what I did.
So I wanted to first of all comment on the fact that there's been a pretty lively Q&A session that's been happening. So we'll touch upon a few of those. One quick question is, where was the 1945 displayed in London?
Oh, you would ask me that. At the Prince's Gallery in Piccadilly Square, if that's not something I'm making up. I had it on the screen, and sadly, sometimes I put things on slides so I don't have to remember them. My bad. Okay, wonderful. Some people are asking about the books, but you've already touched on those. One person saying, are you familiar with the Robert Toner collection of the Théâtre de LaMonte fashion dolls? He's a retired doll designer. Yeah, he worked with Maryhill some years before me to create his Théâtre de LaMonte line series. Yeah, we know them well. Wonderful. Off the wall question, do you know how I can ask for permission to use one of these photos in my work, says somebody. Yeah, send me an email. We'll send you a form. Perfect. It's quite easy. Good. One
What is the detailing in the Schiaparelli from 1946? I can't quite see it. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. My French is not the best.
I think we would have to talk about that one-on-one because I can't get back to the pictures. Send me an email. Send me an email.
Send him an email. Okay, so this is from Margie Tremblay. There was a female designer from Paris who was not accepted by the male designers. I saw an exhibit in Paris many years ago. All I recall is that she created a lime green and white striped outfit, recalling that it was a dress or a suit. If my memory serves correctly, they were diagonal stripes, possibly done in a V shape in a dress or suit. Are you familiar with this female designer?
No.
Okay.
My bad, but I'm not.
It's all good. Will there be a recording of this available? Absolutely, everyone. We send everybody who's registered a link to this recording, as well as our Facebook Live. You can find it pretty immediately. It'll also be on our YouTube page. Wow, there's so many comments. This is wild. Okay. Fashion has been a passion of mine for over 50 years, and I've never known of the Théâtre de la Mode. Thank you for this presentation.
Can I add something? Can I add something quickly?
Sure.
You should also know about the Mercy train dolls at either the Brooklyn Museum, okay, because they use the same technology, the same mannequins, slightly larger, and it's 200 years, a 200-year history of French fashion by the exact same designers who created the Théâtre de la Mode outfits.
It's a whole other subject matter, but it's really fascinating, and there's remarkable parallels.
Absolutely.
Someone's wondering if Coco Chanel participated in Théâtre de la Mode?
She did not. She was not doing anything but perfume at that point. She had taken the warriors off, and she hadn't geared up again.
Were any of the fashions influenced by the war or military? I mean, aside from that one set you were talking about.
There are some, the song that comes to mind is Lovely Rita Meter Maid, because that's kind of how, you know, a little bit padded shoulders and a uniform jacket and whatnot.
Got it. How were the designers selected? Was there a process for that?
I think they were all members of the Syndicale, so they were established. Yeah. Okay.
Some people are saying they're coming to Maryhill next week. They can't wait to see it in person.
Okay, send me an email.
Send them an email. This is wonderful. I think we've touched on most of them. So I have a couple tiny follow-up questions. You and I have discussed about how there's remarkable parallels between this post-war Paris time and sort of our current pandemic moment, especially with Christian Dior's, 2020 line, as well as Jeremy Scott's.
Right.
And I was wondering if you wanted to maybe close with talking a little bit about how there are really interesting parallels between what happened then and now.
Yeah. So during the last year, when the fashion houses couldn't have the runway show, the two Dior and Moschino, Jeremy Scott created a marionette fashion show. As soon as we're done talking, you need to go look it up on YouTube and then go look at the Dior fashion show. It's a 15-minute long film about it. So the Théâtre de la Mode was created during a time of real privation. And of course, people couldn't travel too much because everything was still being directed towards the war effort. And the immediate, and the UK had shortages for years and years. But by virtue of the Théâtre de la Mode going to Paris, people could see going to London, people could see what was going on in Paris. And there's just many similarities, mostly having to do with restrictions on travel and movement and people not necessarily having access to each other that in a normal year that they would have.
Absolutely. And I did just drop a link to that in the chat. So if any of you guys want to find both of those videos, they're there. Wonderful. Well, I just want to be the first to thank you again, Steve, for your generosity and your collaboration, for allowing the Barre Art Museum to borrow 2 of these remarkable mannequins for our own exhibit, for generously offering to allow us to have you here today, as well as sending the stands for those. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, and we're really honored to have been able to host you here this evening. Thank you.
I still have my fingers crossed that I can come see the show.
Good. We hope so, and we'd welcome you.
Thanks.
So a few closing thoughts. We are open to the public. The Barre Art Museum is open Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 5, Saturday, Sunday, noon to 5. We're closed on Mondays. Please come visit. If you're a museum member or would like to become a museum member, we do have a VIP virtual preview members only event next Thursday at 6 p.m. It's virtual. You can join the artist Karen LaMonte, myself, and as well as our set designers who recreated sets inspired by the Théâtre de la Mode to house her beautiful pieces of cast glass, iron, and white bronze. I hope you can join us. If you become a museum member, you get a special invitation. You can join us for our public opening Friday, September 10th, 5 to 8 p.m. It's free and open to the public. We'll have pop-up performances by the Core Theater Ensemble, as well as original costumes by ODU graduate Phil Odango throughout the museum. We have a number of really exciting partner programs. The ODU Costume Design Department had an entire semester devoted to the Théâtre de la Mode, as well as Karen Marmont. They created their own exhibit that will be on view at the Good Theater of their own 1/3 fashions inspired by A Midsummer's Night Dream. It's called Behold the Night. The OD Theater Department has developed a remarkable exhibit or performance, Intimate Apparel, talking about Esther, an African-American seamstress in 1905 in New York, who was sort of the unsung hero behind the person that made a lot of the intimate apparel for the ladies of New York City. If any of this has been interesting, or if you enjoy our free programs, please consider becoming a museum member. We'd love to have you. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you again. Bye now, everyone.